I overheard my wife bragging to her friends about cheating on me with a personal trainer half my age, so I quietly packed a bag and drove to a hotel to plan my divorce strategy. Sometimes the universe has a twisted sense of timing that works perfectly in your favor. I'm Benjamin, 49, a pharmaceutical research director who spent the last 15 years building a company that develops diabetes treatments, and I thought I had a solid marriage with Charlotte, my wife of 12 years. I'd been in Chicago for a medical research conference that week, presenting our latest clinical trial results to potential investors, when my Thursday afternoon flight got moved up by 6 hours due to incoming storms. Instead of calling Charlotte to let her know I'd be home early, I decided to surprise her with dinner from her favorite Italian place in our suburban Milwaukee neighborhood. I pulled into our driveway around 7:30, grabbed the takeout bags, and used my key to enter through the front door as quietly as possible. That's when I heard Charlotte's voice coming from her home office, speaking louder than usual in that animated way she gets when she's gossiping with her tennis league friends over video chat. I was about to call out and announce my arrival when I caught fragments of her conversation that made me freeze in place near the staircase. She was describing someone named Wesley, a 29-year-old personal trainer she'd been seeing for months, and the details she was sharing with her friends about their intimate encounters made my stomach drop through the floor. Charlotte was laughing as she told them about Wesley's downtown loft apartment, how energetic and passionate he was compared to what she called my boring predictability, and how she'd been scheduling their meetings around my work schedule by claiming she had charity committee obligations twice a week. The casual cruelty in her voice as she mocked my performance and energy levels while praising this other man's attributes hit me like a physical blow, but what really destroyed me was hearing her friends encouraging her behavior and asking for more salacious details like they were discussing a soap opera plot instead of the destruction of my marriage. I stood there for maybe 10 minutes, listening to Charlotte describe how Wesley made her feel young and desired again, how she'd never experienced such passion with me, and how she was considering extending their arrangement indefinitely since I was apparently too focused on my research to notice her emotional needs weren't being met. When she started detailing their upcoming plans for a weekend getaway that coincided with a medical conference I'd be attending in Boston, I realized this wasn't some momentary lapse in judgment but a calculated, ongoing betrayal that she was treating like entertainment for her social circle. I quietly set the Italian food on the kitchen counter, walked upstairs to our bedroom, and methodically packed a week's worth of clothes into my travel bag while processing the fact that the woman I'd trusted completely had been living a double life for months. I left through the garage without making a sound, drove straight to the downtown Marriott where I keep a corporate account for visiting researchers, and checked into a suite where I could think clearly about my next moves without having to look at Charlotte's face or pretend everything was normal. That first night in the hotel room, staring out at the Milwaukee skyline while replaying every detail of what I'd overheard, I felt a strange mix of devastation and clarity that I'd never experienced before in my life. I spent the next 48 hours methodically assembling the most elite legal team Milwaukee had to offer, treating my divorce preparation like the strategic research project it needed to be. The first call I made was to Margaret Hensley, the city's most prestigious divorce attorney who specialized in high-net-worth cases and had a reputation for protecting her clients' assets with surgical precision. Margaret's downtown office overlooked Lake Michigan, and when I explained my situation during our emergency Saturday morning consultation, she immediately grasped the complexity of my financial position and the need for absolute discretion given my pharmaceutical company's pending patent applications worth approximately $3.1 million. She recommended bringing in Thomas Chin, a forensic accountant who could trace every financial transaction Charlotte had made over the past year and identify any hidden assets or suspicious spending patterns that might indicate she'd been planning this betrayal longer than I realized. Within hours, I was sitting across from Thomas in his sterile conference room, watching him pull up our joint bank statements, credit card records, and investment portfolios on multiple computer screens while explaining how he'd create a comprehensive financial snapshot that would protect my research company and intellectual property from Charlotte's inevitable demands for half of everything I'd built over 15 years of dedicated work. The third member of my legal team was Rebecca Morrison, my estate planning attorney who'd handled my patents and corporate structure since I founded the company, and she immediately began drafting amendments to my will and trust documents to remove Charlotte as beneficiary and redirect my assets to our twin daughters, Emma and Sophie, who were both pursuing graduate degrees at Boston University and University of Washington respectively. By Sunday afternoon, I had a complete legal strategy in place that would shield my pharmaceutical research, protect the patents I'd developed for revolutionary diabetes treatments, and ensure Charlotte couldn't claim ownership of intellectual property she'd never contributed to or understood. Margaret suggested hiring a private investigator to document Charlotte's affair before she realized I knew about it, so I met with David Walsh, a former police detective who specialized in matrimonial investigations and had worked dozens of cases involving cheating spouses trying to hide assets during divorce proceedings. David's preliminary research into Wesley revealed he was a personal trainer at an upscale fitness center downtown who rented a modern loft apartment in the warehouse district, and within 6 hours of surveillance, David had confirmed that Charlotte was meeting Wesley twice weekly on Tuesdays and Fridays, exactly when she claimed to be volunteering at the animal shelter. The photographs David showed me on Monday evening were devastating but necessary proof of Charlotte's deception, showing her entering Wesley's building with overnight bags and flowers, looking happier and more animated than I'd seen her in years while she was supposedly dedicating her time to helping abandoned pets. David installed sophisticated surveillance equipment near Wesley's loft and began tracking Charlotte's movements, discovering she'd been lying about the timeline of their relationship since phone records indicated they'd been in contact for 6 months, not the 4 months she'd mentioned to her tennis friends during that devastating video call I'd overheard. The methodical documentation of Charlotte's betrayal felt like conducting a clinical trial, gathering irrefutable evidence while maintaining emotional distance from the data, though I couldn't completely suppress the bitter irony that I was applying the same analytical skills I used to develop life-saving medications to document the death of my marriage. I orchestrated the perfect moment to serve Charlotte with divorce papers by coordinating with David to track her movements and ensure she'd be caught completely off guard at Wesley's apartment. David had been monitoring their pattern for 2 weeks and confirmed they met every Tuesday and Friday evening between 7 and 11, with Charlotte always parking in the visitor garage beneath Wesley's upscale loft building in the warehouse district. I hired a professional process server named Marcus who specialized in difficult cases and had experience serving papers to people trying to avoid legal consequences, and I scheduled the service for Tuesday evening at 8:15 when David's surveillance showed they typically ordered takeout and ate dinner on Wesley's balcony overlooking the river. Marcus positioned himself in the lobby while David monitored from across the street with telephoto equipment, and when the delivery driver from their usual Thai restaurant arrived, Marcus followed him up to the 15th floor and waited until the food was delivered before approaching Wesley's door. Charlotte opened the door wearing nothing but Wesley's oversized workout shirt and a pair of his gym shorts, clearly expecting another delivery or maybe a neighbor, and her face went through a complete transformation from casual annoyance to absolute horror when Marcus identified himself and handed her the thick envelope containing divorce papers, financial disclosure demands, and a temporary restraining order preventing her from accessing our joint investment accounts. The sound that came out of Charlotte's mouth was something between a scream and a sob, and she immediately started shouting for Wesley while trying to slam the door, but Marcus had already completed the service and David was capturing everything through the floor-to-ceiling windows as Wesley appeared behind Charlotte wearing only basketball shorts and looking completely panicked. I watched David's real-time video feed from my hotel room as Charlotte collapsed against Wesley's doorframe, clutching the papers while he read over her shoulder and realized he'd been sleeping with a married woman whose husband apparently had enough money to hire investigators and attorneys. The confrontation spilled into the hallway of Wesley's building as other residents opened their doors to see what was causing the commotion, and David captured Charlotte screaming about how I'd ruined her life while Wesley backed away from her like she'd suddenly become radioactive, clearly understanding that his casual affair had just become a legal nightmare that could destroy his reputation and his personal training business. Charlotte tried calling my phone 17 times that night while I sat in my hotel suite, watching her leave increasingly frantic voicemails that ranged from tearful apologies to furious threats to desperate pleas for me to answer so we could talk this through like adults. But I'd already instructed Margaret to handle all communication through legal channels and had blocked Charlotte's number on everything except my business phone, which she didn't know about. Charlotte launched a desperate multi-front campaign to salvage her situation, starting with an attempted break-in at our lakefront house where I'd temporarily relocated after leaving the hotel. I'd driven out to the lake house on Thursday morning to collect research files from my home office and found Charlotte's car parked in our driveway, with clear evidence she tried to force open the back door using a crowbar she'd apparently borrowed from our neighbor's garage. The security system I'd had installed 2 days earlier captured everything on video, showing Charlotte frantically searching through my study and bedroom, probably looking for financial documents or evidence of my legal strategy, before giving up and leaving when she couldn't find anything useful since I'd already moved all important papers to Margaret's office safe. Within hours of the break-in attempt, Charlotte had mobilized her entire family for what she called an intervention, led by her sister Victoria, who ran a successful social media consulting business and had over 40,000 Instagram followers who regularly watched her lifestyle content and family updates. Victoria began posting cryptic messages about supporting family members through difficult transitions and the importance of forgiveness during challenging times, clearly trying to create public pressure for me to reconsider the divorce while positioning Charlotte as the victim of my unreasonable demands. Charlotte's parents drove up from their retirement community in Florida, and her brother Michael, who worked as a commercial real estate broker in Chicago, took time off to serve as the family's unofficial negotiator, not realizing that I had recordings of Charlotte planning to drain our joint investment accounts to fund what she described to Wesley as a romantic European vacation they'd take after my Boston conference. The family intervention took place at our lake house on Saturday afternoon, with Charlotte, her parents, Victoria, and Michael all gathered in our living room expecting me to participate in some kind of mediated discussion about saving our marriage. But I refused to attend and instead had Margaret send a legal representative who informed them that all communication needed to go through official channels and that Charlotte's break-in attempt had been reported to local police. The situation escalated dramatically when Charlotte, apparently coached by Victoria's social media expertise, filed a police report claiming I had threatened her during a phone call and was exhibiting erratic behavior that made her fear for her safety, a completely fabricated story that was designed to create grounds for a restraining order that would give her access to our house and financial accounts. Charlotte's false police report backfired spectacularly when Margaret provided the investigating officers with time-stamped evidence showing I was in depositions at Margaret's office during the exact time Charlotte claimed I'd threatened her, along with phone records proving we hadn't spoken directly since the night I'd overheard her bragging about Wesley to her tennis friends. The police dismissed Charlotte's complaint within 24 hours and noted in their report that filing false accusations could result in charges against her, while Victoria quietly deleted several of her supportive social media posts after realizing the family's legal position was much weaker than Charlotte had led them to believe. Our twin daughters, Emma and Sophie, flew home from their graduate programs in Boston and Seattle respectively, initially planning to mediate between their parents and help salvage what they thought was a marriage worth saving, but their perspective changed completely when I played them portions of Charlotte's recorded conversations where she'd mocked my work and described their father as boring and predictable compared to her passionate young lover. Emma, who was pursuing her MBA and had always been the more analytical of our daughters, immediately understood the financial implications of Charlotte's betrayal and supported my decision to protect the pharmaceutical patents that would eventually fund their education and inheritance, while Sophie, studying environmental science, was more emotionally devastated by Charlotte's casual cruelty but agreed that reconciliation wasn't possible after hearing the contempt in her mother's voice during those recorded calls. Charlotte's high-powered attorney launched an incredibly aggressive campaign demanding 70% of all marital assets, including my pharmaceutical research company and the pending patent applications for revolutionary diabetes treatments that represented 15 years of dedicated scientific work. Her legal team, led by Richard Steinberg, who specialized in high-stakes divorces involving business owners and professional athletes, filed motions claiming that Charlotte had been an essential partner in building my success and deserved compensation for sacrificing her own career advancement to support my research endeavors, despite the fact that she'd never shown any interest in my work and had actually discouraged me from taking on additional projects that required evening or weekend laboratory time. Within weeks of Charlotte's initial filing, anonymous complaints began appearing with the state medical board questioning my research ethics and suggesting that my clinical trials hadn't followed proper protocols, forcing me to hire a specialized defense firm that cost $12,000 just for the initial consultation and review of my laboratory practices and patient safety records. Someone was also leaking false information to pharmaceutical industry publications suggesting that my company was facing financial instability and that several major investors were reconsidering their commitments, which threatened to derail a crucial funding round that would allow us to move our diabetes treatment into Phase 3 clinical trials. Margaret's team quickly identified the source of these attacks as coming from Charlotte's side, likely coordinated by her brother Michael, who had connections in business media through his commercial real estate work, and we filed countermotions seeking sanctions for attempting to destroy my professional reputation as a negotiating tactic in divorce proceedings. The legal warfare intensified during Charlotte's deposition when Richard attempted to portray me as a controlling workaholic who had driven his client to seek emotional fulfillment elsewhere. But their strategy completely collapsed when Margaret introduced recorded conversations where Charlotte discussed hiding income from her part-time interior design consulting work and planning to transfer money to offshore accounts that Wesley had apparently researched for her. Charlotte's deposition became a disaster when she was forced to admit under oath that she'd been planning to drain our joint investment accounts, had lied about her volunteer work at the animal shelter for 6 months, and had actually asked Wesley to help her research ways to hide assets from potential divorce proceedings, revealing that her affair wasn't just emotional betrayal but part of a calculated financial scheme. The proceedings took an absolutely stunning turn when Wesley himself was subpoenaed by Margaret's team and appeared in court looking terrified and completely out of his depth, wearing an ill-fitting borrowed suit and clearly regretting his involvement with a married woman whose husband had the resources to drag him into legal proceedings. Under oath, Wesley admitted that Charlotte had discussed drugging my evening protein shakes with sleep aids to ensure I slept deeply on nights when she planned to meet him, which she'd laughingly described as her foolproof system for avoiding detection, and that she'd also asked him to research divorce laws in states with more favorable asset division rules in case she needed to establish residency elsewhere before filing papers. Wesley's testimony was devastating for Charlotte's case because it demonstrated premeditation and criminal intent that went far beyond a simple extramarital affair, and Richard immediately began damage control by suggesting his client had been joking about the sleep aids and that Wesley had misunderstood her casual comments about asset protection. Margaret countered by producing text messages between Charlotte and Wesley where she'd specifically mentioned purchasing over-the-counter sleeping medications and discussing dosages that would be undetectable but effective, along with screenshots of her internet searches for information about property laws in Nevada and Florida that clearly showed she'd been planning an exit strategy for months before I discovered her affair. The revelation that Charlotte had been systematically poisoning my food to facilitate her cheating created grounds for criminal charges that could have resulted in jail time, and Richard privately approached Margaret about settlement negotiations rather than risk his client facing felony charges for attempted assault and conspiracy to commit fraud. After months of brutal legal warfare, Charlotte's position weakened significantly when her own tennis league friends began cooperating with my legal team, revealing text messages where she joked about playing the long game until my patents matured and she could claim half of their value in divorce proceedings. Margaret had subpoenaed phone records from Charlotte's closest friends, including Jennifer Walsh and Patricia Morrison, who'd been present during that devastating video call where I'd first discovered the affair, and their testimony revealed that Charlotte had been discussing divorce strategy and asset division for over 8 months while publicly maintaining the facade of a happy marriage. The text messages Jennifer provided to the court were particularly damaging, showing Charlotte writing about how she needed to time her exit perfectly to maximize her financial settlement, with specific mentions of waiting until my diabetes treatment patents were approved by the FDA before filing papers, since approved patents were worth significantly more than pending applications. Charlotte's initial demands for $4.2 million, ongoing spousal support of $8,000 monthly, and half ownership in my research company were completely unrealistic given the evidence of her calculated betrayal, and Margaret countered with an offer based on documented fraud, attempted poisoning, and Charlotte's own admissions about planning to hide assets offshore. The settlement negotiations dragged on for 6 weeks as Richard desperately tried to salvage something from his client's collapsed position, but Charlotte's leverage disappeared completely when Wesley started dating a 23-year-old yoga instructor named Amber and blocked Charlotte's number after she showed up at his apartment uninvited 3 times in 1 week, clearly unable to accept that their affair was over and that he wanted nothing to do with her legal problems. Margaret's forensic accountant Thomas discovered additional evidence of Charlotte's deception when he traced her credit card purchases and found she'd been using our joint account to buy expensive gifts for Wesley, including a $1,500 watch and several $100s worth of workout clothes and supplements, effectively making me pay for her affair while she was simultaneously planning to drug me and steal half my life's work. The final settlement negotiations occurred in Margaret's conference room on a gray December morning, just 3 days before our case was scheduled for trial, when Charlotte appeared looking dramatically different than the confident woman who'd initially demanded millions of dollars and complete financial independence. She'd lost at least 20 pounds, her hair was poorly styled, and she wore an inexpensive outfit that suggested her family was no longer funding her legal expenses or lifestyle, while Richard seemed eager to conclude the case and move on to clients who weren't facing potential criminal charges for poisoning their spouses. Margaret presented our final offer with clinical precision, explaining that Charlotte would receive a structured payout of $1.8 million spread over 8 years rather than a lump sum, allowing me to retain complete ownership of my research company and all existing patents while providing Charlotte with enough money to rebuild her life if she managed it responsibly. The agreement included $5,500 in monthly spousal support for exactly 5 years, after which Charlotte would be expected to support herself through employment or her interior design business. Plus, she would keep her jewelry, personal belongings, and half the proceeds from selling our lakefront house, which we'd agreed to put on the market immediately. Charlotte accepted the settlement with visible reluctance and what looked like genuine despair, probably realizing that she'd traded a comfortable marriage and financial security for a brief affair with someone who'd abandoned her the moment their relationship became inconvenient for him. The divorce finalized on a bitter February morning with snow falling across downtown Milwaukee as Charlotte appeared in court looking visibly diminished, having lost significant weight and moved back with her parents in their cramped retirement community condo after Wesley's complete abandonment left her with nowhere else to turn. I watched from across the courtroom as she signed the final papers with shaking hands, wearing the same inexpensive outfit she'd worn to settlement negotiations and looking like someone who'd aged 5 years in the span of 8 months, while her father sat beside her looking embarrassed and her mother refused to make eye contact with anyone. The judge's final decree officially ended our 12-year marriage and granted me everything Margaret had fought for, including complete ownership of my pharmaceutical research company, all existing and pending patents, and the intellectual property rights that would generate millions in revenue over the coming decades. I sold our lakefront house within 6 months to a pharmaceutical executive from Chicago who appreciated its location and the private laboratory space I'd built in the converted basement, netting enough profit to purchase a modern downtown penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan and a state-of-the-art home office where I could continue my diabetes research without any reminders of my failed marriage. Charlotte's social media influencer sister Victoria quietly distanced herself from the family drama after court records became public through local business publications, revealing the extent of Charlotte's deception and attempted fraud, which damaged Victoria's carefully curated online brand and cost her several sponsorship deals with lifestyle companies that didn't want to be associated with the scandal. Our daughters Emma and Sophie gradually rebuilt relationships with both parents, but their weekly phone calls and holiday visits made it clear they were deeply disappointed in their mother's choices and had lost considerable respect for someone they'd previously admired for her intelligence and social skills. I threw myself into my research work with renewed focus and energy, leading to a breakthrough diabetes treatment that attracted major partnerships with 2 international pharmaceutical companies and validated 15 years of dedicated scientific investigation. While Charlotte struggled with depression and attempted to rebuild her interior design business after burning bridges with most of her former social circle who'd discovered the truth about her marriage and the circumstances surrounding our divorce. Emma visited my new penthouse regularly during her winter break from Boston University and told me that Charlotte had gained back some of the weight she'd lost during the legal proceedings but seemed emotionally fragile and rarely left her parents' condo except for mandatory therapy sessions and occasional attempts to network with potential interior design clients who weren't familiar with her recent history. 6 months after our divorce became final, I began cautiously dating Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a fellow pharmaceutical researcher who specialized in cardiovascular treatments and shared my passion for developing medications that could improve millions of lives. And our relationship developed naturally around shared professional interests and mutual respect rather than the superficial attraction and financial dependency that had characterized my marriage to Charlotte. Charlotte's attempts to restart her interior design business met with limited success since her portfolio was outdated and most of her previous clients had been friends from our social circle who no longer trusted her judgment or wanted to maintain personal relationships with someone who'd been exposed as calculating and dishonest in such a public way. The last update I received about Charlotte came through Emma, who mentioned during one of our monthly dinners that her mother had started seeing a therapist regularly and was working part-time at a furniture store while living with her increasingly frustrated parents who'd expected their daughter's visit to last weeks rather than months.